All right, well, good evening. My name is Jessica Evans. I am the Community Involvement Coordinator for the Westlake Landfill site. Before we get into the presentation, I just have a couple things to go over. First, this meeting is being live streamed on Zoom, and the recording will be posted on EPA Region 7's YouTube channel. That information will be available on the Westlake Landfill site profile page, and we'll also send it out to the email distribution group. We would also like to acknowledge any elected officials or elected official staffers in the room. If you're joining us on the live stream, if you could just type in your name and if you're associated with an office. But for any elected officials or staffers in the room, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves.
Thank you.
Ward 2, City of Richmond. Chris Walker, U.S. Senator.
Great, thank you so much. We really appreciate everyone coming out tonight. We have a pretty full agenda. I'm going to go through and introduce the EPA staff here this evening, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bob Juergens to give some opening remarks, and then Chris Jump is going to get into the technical presentation. After the technical presentation, we will have a question and answer session, and then we're also going to have the public availability session as well. That is going to start at 8:30 and go till about 9 o'clock. So you have another opportunity to have those one-on-one discussions with members of the site team. So for introductions this evening, we have Bob Juergens, Superfund Division Director, TJ Adkins, Remediation Branch Manager, myself, Jessica Evans, Community Involvement Coordinator, Chris Jump, Lead Remedial Project Manager, Tom Mailer, Remedial Project Manager for Operable Units 1 and 2, Sneh Bagat, Remedial Project Manager for Operable Unit 3, Jesse Kidwell, one of our hydrogeologists, Kellen Ashford, Superfund Press Officer, Shannon Beiser, Lead Press Officer, Shaylee Borsani, one of our community involvement coordinators, and then Carmen King. Carmen is not with the EPA, but she is a technical advisor and a resource to the community that can help you all kind of understand technical documents or provide other assistance. All right, next I want to introduce you to Bob Juergens, Superfund Division Director.
Right, thank you, Jess. I also want to acknowledge and thank our colleagues from the state of Missouri with the public health. We appreciate them being here to be able to answer questions as well. So EPA, it's good to see all the faces here. Folks are coming out. It's clear that this is still a topic that we all need to work through, and we really value the public's input on this. EPA is here tonight to follow through on our commitment to be as transparent as possible and to make sure that we're providing the information that you need as we move through the process. We know this is a long process. We hear you. There are times, I'm sure my staff, I'd say, okay, what can we do to speed things up? It's really important we get this right. So as they're going through the remedial design, it's just important for us to be as safe as possible for the workers, for the community, and whoops. Okay, is that a little better? Can you hear? So we just want to make sure that the design that is done is going to be extremely valuable and is going to just provide the best product we can. The PRPs, the responsible parties, they are going to be on the hook for doing this cleanup. And so it's the team has been working with them to get the comments, and this 90% design for the remedial design is a big step forward. We are working diligently to do this. We do have a good team. I think we heard some of that here from the folks that have cheered a little bit for them. I'm very proud of the work they do. They put a lot of time and effort into that. And I think that is showing as we are providing really good comments back to the responsible parties and making a difference on what this final design is going to look like. They're very thorough, and that is part of the strong points of this team. And whether it's on the remedial design, the sampling that was completed, or the groundwater investigation, working very hard to get all of those done. So we know that there is uncertainty in the community. Hopefully, the presentation that Chris and Tom are going to provide tonight is going to be valuable for you to give you an idea of where we're headed with this site. So the update is going to be on the Operable Unit 1 and 2 remedy. That is going to be the focus. I understand there may be other questions, but our focus tonight is really going to be on that remedy. The good news is we're going to have the public availability session afterwards. After they do their presentation, we'll have the question and answer that will be right here. We'll have 2 microphones that we'll be able to use for folks who want to ask questions. And then we'll still be around after that question answer session is over. So thank you for welcoming us into the community. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's probably going to take over first. We'll let her do the presentation and see if we can provide as much information as possible. So thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, I know most of you know a lot about this site, but if there are new people, I just kind of wanted to go over a brief overview. So there are 3 different operable units at the Westlake landfill site. OU1 or Operable Unit 1 is the areas that have radiologically impacted materials. That's the one that we're going to be talking about most tonight. Area 2 are landfilled areas that do not have radioactive material in them. And OU3 is site-wide groundwater. In this figure, you can see the blue areas are OU1. So there's area 1 and area 2. The yellow areas are the landfilled areas that do not have RIM. Actually, I'm going to correct that because this figure is from when we did the ROD amendment in 2018. This is where the estimated boundaries were. We've done a lot of additional work and we found additional RIM, as many of you know. So this is a picture of all the different borings that have been done. The yellow areas are the areas where we knew there was RIM at the time that we signed the ROD in 2018. The dark blue dots are areas that we know have RIM. The light blue dots do not have RIM. So as you can see, we have RIM now. This area is called the Construction and Demolition Landfill, or the CDL, and that has RIM. And the northern half, later. Okay.
That'll be easier.
I didn't hit the laser.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is what we call the CDL, or Construction and Demolition Landfill. This is the Inactive Sanitary Landfill, or ISL. This is area 2, and this is area 1. So we now know that these 2 areas also contain RIM, and they are being added to the remedy. We also found RIM in this is a surface water body where the drainage goes. And this is also part of the drainage along the site. We also found RIM though. Those areas are all being added to the Operable Unit 1 now. So like I said, the design investigation found new RIM in these additional areas. The positive thing is that DI also found that we had less high concentration RIM. That doesn't mean there's less RIM in general, but we have less of the really high concentration RIM, which is more difficult to dispose of. So we're able to make some changes potentially to how we're going to load and handle the RIM based on that. So that's what the main thing I want to talk to you about is these changes that we're going to make based on the additional data that we've collected and all of the design work that has gone on. So, like I said, the remedy that was described in the ROD is going to be essentially the same. There are minor changes that are going to be occurring, but the remedy that was selected in 2018 is a partial excavation of rim down. Most of the rim to 12 feet will be removed, and there are options of removing the higher concentration stuff deeper, up to 20 feet deep. Then there will be an engineered cover placed over the excavated area and anywhere that rim remains on site. And there's also an area called Lot 2A2 where there's a commercial business. Their parking area has had some material in it. That will be cleaned up so that it can be used for any purpose. So we are removing the rim
Wow.
and background there. And all of these differences, when we make changes after the remedy is selected, we have to document them in one of three ways. If it's a fundamental change, like what we did in 2018, adding excavation, we have to do the whole process over again. We evaluate everything. These minor changes, there's two categories, significant or non-significant. Those are circular terms. They don't mean exactly what they sound like. It's related to the rod, but basically there are 6 changes that we're going to talk about. They will be documented in what's called an explanation of significant differences. And that document will be made public once we put it out, once it's finalized. So these are the 6 changes, and I'm going to go over these quickly, and then we'll discuss each one in more detail. So first of all, it's the expansion of OU1 to incorporate all of the rim that we've identified at the site. There will be an increase in the estimated cost. That's a requirement to consider or to document. So there will be a change in the required top slope of the landfill. Landfills have to drain. So there's a requirement that's changing for that, and I'll discuss that more. We think we're going to be able to do direct rim waste loading rather than having to build a building to do it. That means we can get it off site faster potentially. There will be pre-excavation confirmation sampling, which will help the process move faster and be safer. And we are also eliminating the need for an on-site laboratory because of some of the other changes. So I'll go into those in more detail now. So the first change is the expansion of OU1. The ROD amendment in 2018 says that OU1 is where there is rim. So the fact that we found rim in other areas, we have to expand the site to incorporate that. So this remedy can address all of that rim. And the same remedy components of a partial excavation with off-site disposal and engineered cover will be applied to this expanded area. And basically it's increasing the size of the OU1 has increased by about 62% or 40 acres. The size of the cover is increasing by about 48%. And the amount of material that's going to be disposed off-site is increasing by about 25%. And those numbers are estimates, and it'll be more refined when we actually start doing the work and finishing the design. So this is a picture. We still show the former area, OU1, area 1 and 2 in blue. New area or OU1 is the hatched area. So you can see that we've incorporated 2 fairly significant areas of what used to be OU2. We've also incorporated this area into the site and this area out here in the ditches. We've also found that there is some shallow rim in the CDL in this lower southwestern corner that will also be excavated. And we have an improved understanding and just in general of the distribution of rim in the site, so we can really focus the excavation more fully and take less time. So this expansion will allow us to address each expanded area. So the cover will be going over the ISL and the CDL. We'll be excavating the material that's in the drainage ditch in the north surface water body. And there will be excavation in the CDL, like I said previously. The second change I'm going to talk about is the cost increase. It's basically consistent with the expansion in size of the site and also inflation. As we all know, inflation has been fairly high recently, so there are also costs associated with that. The cost of the expansion is increasing by about $113.5 million. So the revised total cost of the remedy is approximately $392 million. These numbers were provided to us by the potentially responsible parties. They may be revised in the future, but for this purpose, we had to have a revised cost estimate to do an explanation of significant differences. So we're looking at a cost of $392 million compared to the original estimate of $229 million. So the third change is the one that is associated with the top of the landfill cover. Applicable or relevant and appropriate requirements are basically regulations that have to be complied with for surplus sites. And those are things like Missouri solid waste regulations, stormwater regulations, those types of things. One of the regulations that the state has a minimum slope at the top of the landfill of 5%. And that's so that the water will drain off the landfill to keep it from filtering in and potentially causing leachate. That 5% is intended to take into consideration the decomposition of the waste and settlement that occurs. So once that settlement occurs, it typically takes 20 to 30 years. That will end up with, a 2% slope. It still has a positive gradient to drain. Because this waste was landfilled 30 to 50 years ago, most of that decomposition and settlement has already occurred. So we are adding a waiver so that the requirement for this top slope will be 3% rather than the 5%. Sorry. And part of the reasoning for that is that lower slopes have less erosion. This cover is required to be installed to last up to 1,000 years, but for at least 200. That's a lot longer than most landfills. So even a minor slope change is important to the longevity of the cover. And that's why we've done evaluations and modeling of how this cover will settle and the erosion that will come off it. And we've determined that a slope of 3 to 4% will still give us about a 1% slope and meet the requirements. One of the other big changes is looking at direct loading for RIM disposal. Each waste disposal facility has what's called a waste acceptance criteria, which is a list of materials and concentrations that they can accept for disposal. When we were doing the feasibility study to initially evaluate the remedy, there was a concern that if we just excavated the rim, put it right into containers and shipped it to a site, that it might not meet those WAC requirements. If you ship it to a site and it doesn't meet their requirements, they send it back to you. We definitely don't want that happening. So at the time of the ROD, we required there to be a building constructed so that they could blend potentially high concentration and low concentration stuff so that it could be accepted by a waste disposal facility. Now that means you have to move the rim around the site several times. You have to handle it multiple times, which is not ideal. Since we did the DI, we discovered that there's less high concentration stuff. So there's less material that exceeds the waste acceptance criteria. We've also, a couple of the facilities have actually increased their waste acceptance criteria so they can accept higher concentrations, which means that direct loading is now a viable option that we're really excited about, because direct loading into the shipping containers that would be closed before they leave the site, it allows us to remove the rim from the site faster. It decreases the potential for worker exposure and improves the overall health and safety of the remedy. And it results in less handling of the rim. So you're handling it once instead of multiple times. Therefore, the use of this rim staging and loading building is being made conditional based on whether we need to blend the rim or not. We can't make that final decision right now because the disposal facility will be contracted during the remedial action by the contractors doing that work. But we're making this requirement that was formerly a requirement conditional. So they can't meet WAC without blending, they will have to have a building. If we can direct load it in containers, shut them at the excavation location and get them off site, that's the preferred way to do it. And we're hoping that that's what will happen. The fifth change is confirmation sampling. Typically, when you do an excavation remedy, you excavate the hole, excavate what you think you need to, and then you take samples from the sidewalls and the bottom to make sure you removed everything that's required to be removed. It's not ideal for this site to have holes open, waiting for an analytical results. Those holes would either be left open or we'd have to backfill them and potentially re-excavate them. So the PRPs have proposed to do something that's called pre-excavation confirmation sampling. So we have modeled where the rim is currently, and there's some pictures back at the back if you've had a chance to look at those. This would be collecting samples on the outside of those excavations. We divide the boundary into what we call decision units, and we collect multiple samples from that decision unit. The average of those borings has to be below 52.9, which is the requirement for removal at the site. If it's above 52.9, we move outward, take another sample until it is below 52.9. So the excavation boundaries shown on these figures may change slightly after we do this additional sampling. So this process would continue until we have all of the boundaries defined before we actually start the excavation. That allows us to excavate without stopping and to start backfilling as soon as we remove the material we need to. So the idea is to kind of have one cell open, excavated, you open the next one to it and you start backfilling it immediately so that you only have a small area open at any one time. And that helps with things like drainage. You try and prevent rainwater from going in the holes so that nothing can leave the site. All of those things are taken into consideration. The bad news is, I know you guys are sick and tired of hearing about sampling. You're ready for it to be done. This would require some additional sampling to be done before the excavation occurs, but it will speed up the excavation and backfilling process, and it's going to be a safer way to do the process. We're still negotiating this confirmation sampling with the PRPs. We think that it's going to happen, but we're reviewing the work plan. But this is the intended way to do this confirmation sampling. And the last change is that there will no longer be a requirement for an on-site lab. When we were going to be doing the confirmation sampling with the holes open, we wanted to get those analytical results back as quickly as possible. So we were going to have a 24-hour lab running on site. If we do the pre-excavation sampling, it will be done before we have open holes. It will be done earlier in the process when there are other activities going on, like the work plan, hiring the disposal facility, and preparing the roads and the infrastructure on site, so that there's not a need to get the immediate analytical results. We'll get the same turnaround that we've been getting and the same quality of data that we've been using in the investigation. So with those changes to OU1, that also means that there are changes that will have to happen to OU2. So this is just like the last figure, except now OU2 is the crosshatched area. Previously in the OU2 ROD, the areas that had active state permits, which were the CDL here and the Bridgeton landfill here, those were deferred to the state because they already have permits that require closure, and they're a regulated process for doing that. So that made sense to continue the state oversight of those areas. The ISL, or inactive sanitary landfill, did not have an active permit, so EPA will be seeing that work. Since half of the ISL will be going to OU1, this half will still be done under OU2, and EPA will oversee that. The portion of the CDL that does not have RIM, we're still planning to defer to the state, and the state will retain oversight of the Bridgeton landfill as well. With these changes, there's a decrease in cost for the OU2. The original cost estimate was about 6.7 million. The estimate now is about 3.3 million, and that is basically for landfilling or for putting the cover on this southern half of the ISL. This is a diagram of the remedial design process. The last time we were here, all of these things were green. Since then, we were finishing up the design investigation report the last time we were here. We've submitted comments. We have a revised document. We have not finalized that document, but we have all the data that we need to design the remedy. So that will be finalized. That's why it's still in a light blue. We have an approved revised excavation plan, which is what the pictures are of back there. We'd be happy to talk to you further about that. The 90% design is getting darker blue. We were hoping to be able to tell you that we had completed the review of that document and had submitted the comments. We didn't quite make that tonight. We will be submitting the comments sometime in September to the PRPs. Once we submit those comments on the 90% design to the PRPs, we will post that document on our website and the comments, so you can see the work that we're actually doing and see what kind of comments that we've made on their documents. The PRPs have 75 days to resubmit that document to us, making the changes that we've identified that need to be made. We do have quite a few comments on that. So there's a possibility that they could request an extension. We would have to consider whether that's reasonable or not. But basically, we have 75 days for them to resubmit a document to us. We review that document that's resubmitted. We either provide additional comments or we approve it. If we provide additional comments, they have 30 to 60 days to submit another one to us. If we approve it, they have 30 days to submit the professional engineered stamped documents to us. Once those stamped documents are submitted to us, the design process is done. So we're really excited. We're getting close. We can't provide a date because there's still some unknown with the quality of documents we're receiving, how long it will take to revise the documents. But we are excited. We think we're getting really close. We have enough information. We can talk to you about the design and some of the things that are going to be happening. Then comes the remedial action. Unfortunately, when people think of remedial action, they think of the excavators are coming. Well, you can tell by where the excavator is in this picture that that actually happens later in the remedial action. So we have to have an enforceable order in place. Our attorneys are currently working on that, negotiating that. The goal is to have that completed at the same time that the design is complete so that we can roll right into the remedial action. That's the plan. And then there has to be a contracting process to hire the remedial action contractors and hire a disposal facility and some of those types of things, preparing the site, having the roads prepared or infrastructure for drainage and those types of things constructed. After all of that happens, we can start the excavation and then the cover. A lot of these things can happen at the same time, so it looks like it's a long drawn out process, but our plan is to try and have those things happening simultaneously to try and condense the process as much as we can. So in summary, the remedial design is approaching completion. The remedies described in the ROD amendment remains fundamentally the same: partial excavation, offsite disposal, engineered cover, and removal from the lot 2A2 to background. And the changes to the remedy are either necessary because of how the rim has expanded, or they'll improve the remedy by making it safer or faster. So we're We wanted to present this information to you. We promised to be transparent and to keep you updated on the activities. We felt like before we finalize these changes, we wanted to make sure to explain them to you so that you have a chance to ask us questions. But we wanted to move forward with that process so that we can keep moving towards getting to the remedial action. And with that, I think I will open it up for questions and answers. Is there anything I forgot?
No, so for the question and answer session tonight, we're gonna have 2 roving microphones. And so if you all have a question, feel free to raise your hand, and Shannon and Shaylee will come to you. You don't have to get up, in front of the mic. This is something new that we're trying tonight, so please feel free to give us feedback if you like this new format. If you think of any questions tonight, tomorrow, next week, in a month, you can always reach out to me. My contact information is up on the screen. I also hold office hours weekly at Bridgeton City Hall, generally every Wednesday. So you can feel free to reach out to me and schedule a time to meet up in person as well. Thank you.
Harvey?
Thank you. Harvey Ferdman. First, I want to thank you for your hard work. I know you've been working on this for years. And again, you guys are the A team compared to what we had years ago. So I really do appreciate your work. I'm very, very pleased to hear that you're going to be doing the direct loading or whatever the term is, that you're not going to be testing on site. You're not going to be moving around unnecessarily on site. I think that's the best protection for this community. And thank you for that. I have a couple of questions. One is, can you explain a little bit more about the testing of the boundaries? How frequent are the test spots that you're going to do before you do the averaging, and how deep are they going to be? I have
Yeah.
a follow-on question too.
The depth is based on where the rim is. So when, some of the excavations, there's clean material in the upper, 5 or 6 feet. So we would not sample that area. We would go down to where the rim is and sample, if we're doing it laterally, adjacent to where we would expect the rim to be expanded out to. And the same with the top. If we, when we're collecting samples to make sure that we're getting taking the clean material off the top before we excavate the dirty material, it would be at the level we expect the dirty material to start, or to be right above the dirty material, actually. If it's not clean there, then we would require that the excavation start shallower to have material moved off site.
Right, but on a horizontal plane,
On the horizontal plane, I think we required, has to be within 2,000 square meters, each decision unit. Let Tom speak to those details.
Yeah, so this was a requirement in the record of decision. There was going to be averaging for this confirmation sampling process. And I think you all understand the point of the confirmation sampling process is to make sure that what the ROD requires to leave the site is actually what's leaving the site. But yeah, so those units can't be any bigger than 2,000 square meters, which is about 1/2 of an acre. They can be smaller. And if you look at some of those excavation maps, there are some just really small excavation areas. Not everything is a giant, large piece. But I'd say think of it, it's not exactly like this, but think of it like a pancake. And we're going to basically put slices in the pancake. And then there'll be a 1-foot halo around that pancake. And there'll be a certain number of samples from the top, a certain number of samples from the bottom. And we're still working through these details, but it's looking like the most efficient way to do this is to have the top and the bottom samples one set and the outer lateral samples a different set. But there will be averaging either way, and there'll be a statistical kind of calculation that goes into how many samples have to be in that averaging process. Again, still working through that plan, but that's the general process.
okay, thank you. And the other question I have is, with OU2 being under the state's control, does that present any issues with your doing the design work for the runoff, et cetera?
We have to coordinate Because they're adjacent to each other, there will be activities, coordination to make sure that there's not gaps and that the transition from one type of cover to the other is a smooth transition. And that the drainage off of OU1 goes to one area, the drainage off of OU2 goes, maybe separated, especially when we're doing the work. Did that answer your question? Okay. I think I saw a woman over here in the sundress. I think she had her hand up first.
Hi, thank you so much for your information and thanks for this team. I really love working with you guys. It's night and day from what I grew up working on.
I think they were trying to give it to her. She was
Oh,
first.
really? I'm sorry. Was
I have a question. Go ahead. Continue.
well, tacking on to Harvey's question, and then I'll happily give the microphone over. So you're in coordination on comments also with MDNR, correct? On the 90%?
What
Portion of this?
MDNR makes, they provide their comments to EPA and we incorporate those into our comment letters. So it's one set of comments that goes.
Before the
to
completion of the 90%,
But-
right?
Yes, but the state does provide input for us to provide on the documents as well. It's the state and EPA's input.
Okay, and the final tack onto that is, it is a state waiver that you need for the change in slope on the cover, correct?
It doesn't have to come from the state because CERCLA. We have
Overrides.
to implement the remedy. So if we can justify why it will be equally as effective and potentially better, then we can waive that, an ARAR. So we can waive, and we do this with coordinating with the state and talking to them. This was actually brought up in the ROD amendment. We had language in there that said, we don't expect to need a 5% because of how much settlements already occurred. But they still have to do an evaluation, make sure that the slopes that they are designing are appropriate, and submit that documentation to us.
So we can bypass the formal process of a waiver process.
No,
for-
there is a formal process. I mean, basically what we do is we write a technical memorandum,
Mhm.
and that it goes to headquarters. And then that is documented in the explanation of significant differences that also goes to the.
Right, but it's not mirroring of like a state waiver where you'd have a public meeting for that particular
No,
waiver and that's, okay.
no.
All right, I'm
No.
just trying to understand that process.
Right, no, it's, we just have to technically justify the need for it or the reason it's better. And that can be approved through that method.
Very good, thank you. That was my question.
Okay, can you hand it? Thank you.
Hi, Deborah. My question is fairly easy. I want to concur with this group definitely seems to be better and have a greater concern and better mindset of how to actually deal with all of this. So we do all greatly appreciate that. The one question, in no disrespect, I know some of the other places we've talked about, timelines and deadlines for them to get their information and for all of everything to flow freely. How come that's not a requirement for every department, every stage along the way?
Well, we do have deadlines for submitting documents. I mean, the process is they submit a work plan, we review and approve that. They implement the work and have so long to provide the document to us after they do the work.
Okay, let me be a little bit more frank.
Okay.
How come your guys' end? How come you guys didn't give yourself a deadline? Knowing,
Oh, okay. Good question. Our bosses give us deadlines. Sometimes we meet them, occasionally we don't. It really depends on, because we're reviewing documents, we don't know what the quality is going to be. If the documents come in and they require a lot of comments, it takes longer to review. And we want to do justice to the document that we receive. So if we say we're going to review this document in 30 days and it's a crappy document and we can't get all the comments put out and provide the feedback we need in 30 days, it may take us 60. So let me say, for example, we had hoped to get this 90% design reviewed in in 90 days. That was our hope. The document we received is thousands of pages. It covers everything from excavation to stormwater, both during excavation and after, all kinds of, you know, so it's taken us 6 months to review that document, and I don't like that. We were hoping to do it faster, but we've been working diligently to try and get the comments done, and it's just taken us that long. If we one that doesn't contain the information that explains how they're going to do the work, or that has unacceptable work practices in it. So sometimes there's things that are omitted that we feel are important. Sometimes we think they're just doing it wrong. Or sometimes we just make suggestions that you could improve this by doing it a different way. So there's all kinds of levels of comments that we might make. So I wish I had a more straightforward answer, but the review time really is very dependent on the size and type of information that's in the documents we receive. And we often have to pull in experts to look at some of the specifics. So for instance, Tom and I are not stormwater experts. There's a lot of stormwater issues around this. We don't want things running off site. So we went to talk to people that know more about stormwater. So we have to get their feedback, and then we incorporate that into our comments. Like we give the state shorter timeframes to get us comments, and I know it makes it hard on them. They review things faster than we do, and then we incorporate their comments. I'm sure they wish they had more time, many times. So.
Ashley, I did have a question about the slope. So with the change in slope from the 5% to the 3%, and considering the amount of flooding we have in the St. Louis area, how will that impact flooding, and how will flood control be prevented in those areas, considering we have many times more than 100-year floods every other year or so, and how will drainage respond to a lesser slope there? And what kinds of concerns should the public look for at times of torrential downpours?
Good question. The lower slope, it should end up being about the same slope as if we started with 5%. The only thing difference is that the waste is not new and it doesn't have to degrade to settle as much. And the slopes are going to be small on top of the landfill. We just want it to make sure that it doesn't sit on top of the landfill. If we see cattails growing on the top of the landfill, it wasn't built right. So those are the types of things we do in inspections. Is there standing water here? If so, we need to change something. They have some very specific structures for how they will let water flow from one level to another. And I mean, that's all part of the design. They use certain storm sizes that are required to design to. We also did a climate study, and we provided that to the PRPs. And that climate study indicated that in this area, in the next 50 years, storm events may get more intense, more rain in a shorter period of time, but there will be longer periods between those storm events. So we'll have periods of drought and then heavy, heavy rain. That's what's expected. But I mean, that's a prediction. We can't define that for sure. But with that knowledge, we are trying to, we required the PRPs to take that into consideration when they're doing this work. And they understand that. With the rain event in, was it 2023, 2022, the 10 inches, I mean, the PRPs went out and immediately inspected. EPA was there, inspected, and they had any eroded areas repaired within 24 hours. So, it's a matter of trying to design for the expected storms and maybe over designing a little bit to make sure it accounts for things. And then if we see erosion, then we have to go back and revise how that drainage is working. So, it's not, oh, it's one and done, and if it doesn't work, oh darn. It's you know, we design it, if it doesn't work as intended, then there are repairs that have to be made. And that's why CERCLA has a 5-year review process. So even after we say everything's done, every 5 years, we have to come back and evaluate that remedy. Is it working the way we intended? Did requirements change that we need to take into consideration? So there are those kinds of things are built in to try and look forward to make things as protective as possible.
Hi, I actually echo the sentiments of everyone here. It is a night and day difference, so thank you. My question is, with the increase in cost, do you anticipate any pushback or, I guess, fighting between the PRPs to get that signed and the agreement in place?
I don't know that I would say pushback. They definitely, you know, are not going to like the new price tag. We're negotiating with them. Good point. As part of that cost, one reason that we're required to look at the cost changes with any remedy changes is because we have to evaluate cost effectiveness of a remedy. And cost effectiveness, we look at the long-term protectiveness, the short-term protectiveness, and the amount of waste volume decrease. And all those things are compared against the cost. So when we looked at the remedies, the alternatives we evaluated in 2018, we have to look at those and say, okay, would these cost changes have made us select a different remedy? And when we look at it, because the OU1 expanded, every one of those alternatives would have to cap that new area. Every one of the, you know, we also considered full excavation alternatives. Those would have to excavate even more rim. And so those would be exponentially higher. So we still feel like this is the most cost-effective and appropriate alternative that was selected. It's still the same equal protectiveness. So does that answer the question? I can't say whether they're going to push back or, you know, argue against it. I think we have a good explanation for why these costs are appropriate and for moving forward with this design.
Thank you. I'm getting anxious. Do you have a estimate of time that the excavation and remediation will take?
I don't at this point in time. I think we've heard.
Are you asking about how long it will take once it gets started, finished?
Do we have? I don't know if we've seen an estimate about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you were asking, once we do start, how long will it take to finish? Yeah. In the 2018 record of decision, we had an estimate that was without these expansions. And in total with design, it was supposed to be 5 years. And that was about 18 months of design work and then 3.5 years of remediation. It's, as you all know, taken us longer than 18 months to do the design. And we're pretty far along in the design now that we can start to understand what kind of impacts that's going to have on getting it done. And yeah, it's obviously going to take longer to build a larger cap. The excavation amount, the offsite shipment is not changing by a lot. So that's not really, the schedule for that is not changing a whole lot. So I think we will soon be able to talk more definitively about a new estimate for a remediation timeline, but we're not talking about like 10 times longer. It's going to be a moderate change to deal with this expanded cover system, engineered cover system construction.
How you doing? My name's Todd Nickel. I had a question about something that was up on one of those screens. It was called a enforceable action order. Can you explain what that is?
Was that on the timeline that has to happen before the?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I have a few questions.
No,
but go ahead.
that's a legal agreement between the government and the responsible parties that they will implement the remedy. So they have to sign an agreement, and we, include what's called a scope of work that has a schedule for doing things and timeframes. And they agree to pay for it. So that's what's in that agreement. There are 3 responsible parties for this site. So it's a matter right now of negotiating who pays how much. And those are the things that our legal people are dealing with now.
Okay, next one was, where does the dirt come from that gets put back into the landfill after you take out the bad stuff?
Okay. Some of it will come from, some of the waste that is actually excavated. The stuff that is below 52.9 can be put back in the holes, but it's going to be put in the bottom of the hole. So it's deeper. It will not fill the holes, obviously, because we're shipping stuff off site. There's also clean material on top of the landfill, the former covers, and some areas where they brought in rock to cover stuff. So that material can also be used, but the remedial action contractor will have to go out and source those materials. They will have to find a source of soil and clay and rock that meets certain criteria to be used.
Where that comes from? Really?
Right, well, it will be in the remedial action work plan. So we don't know yet, but they will have to provide that information. Yes.
Okay, one last question. You said something about all the dirt, bad dirt, I guess, gets put into containers.
Mhm.
And so it gets shipped off somewhere. What happens to those containers? Do they come back?
No.
No.
No, they're not reused. I guess I'll let Tom speak to that. He's the rad person.
It depends on the container. Train gondola cars do get reused. They're not one-time use, but there are liners and different things that get put in them, and then they have to be decontaminated before they leave the disposal facility and come back. So it's a little different per container, but the hard-sided metal containers will definitely be reused, and there's, like I said, liners and then decontamination process before they leave and get reused again. I was also gonna mention on your question about where the dirt is gonna come from. There's requirements in the design right now for testing that has to be done to all of these materials, and not just design specs, not just like densities and things like that. Metals, radionuclides, there are limits for that they will have to test and make sure that that soil or rock or whatever it is doesn't exceed. And that's something, when we are done commenting on this 90% design, we'll be able to actually point out what those are.
Yeah, and the soft side is the containers would not be reused. They would be disposed of at the facility.
Thank you.
You started with,
Oh, sorry.
Can you actually, and we can well appreciate the complexity of this project and your thoroughness in your approach. But based on all that, can you make a projection on when the actual first load of dirt may leave that site?
I'm sorry, I can't at this point. We hope to be able to do that at some point, but at this point,
1 year, 2 years, 5 years?
10 years.
Of course, we're going to get this question every time we come to a meeting. It's a fair question. You all have been waiting for this for a long time. One of the reasons, and Chris, you talked about this last year, one of the reasons that we don't want to predict a date is because we've been wrong before. And we just, we really, I think Chris and I and Sneh and Jess, we feel like we worked really hard to try to build some trust. And we don't want to set an expectation that we don't have control over. So it's a totally valid question. But I hope you understand that if I thought that I could provide a date that we definitely could meet, I would be the first person to want to come to this group and give it.
Yeah.
Look forward to that day.
Fair.
yes, I know.
Us too.
I know that's not a satisfactory answer, but it's what we have at this point.
you started off with a set of data from 2014, 2020, whatever it was, as kind of your jump off point. You have done additional sampling based on information. But if that first set of sampling that you started with was inaccurate, incomplete, not correct, and now you've gone to step B, what's going to happen or prevent the wrong thing from happening, that there's extra stuff there that nobody knew about, or, you really shouldn't be digging, it's better off left alone and covered. Is that variable going to be dealt with?
I would not say that the sampling that was done previously was wrong. I would say maybe it wasn't complete, that there were questions that needed to further investigation. So I think we have done a more thorough investigation. We have looked at like the aerial photos of where things were being disposed. I mean, we've tried to really research where were things being dug up, where were things being disposed, how did the land surface change over time, where did we see things increase, where did we see them decrease? If we saw a hole, we'll sample. And then we've sampled the perimeter. Like we said, we found some of the ditches. Actually there's, we just learned today that there's going to be a couple more samples collected. So there actually is still work being done to refine the work. I don't know how to provide a better answer.
Sample before you dig, or as you dig, you continue to do that so that there's nothing into the.
Well, and that's why we're doing we're sampling around the excavation to make sure that that's what the confirmation sampling is for. So when we do that, we sample on the outside of what we expect to be excavated. And those outside samples have to be below the excavation level. If they're not, we expand the excavation. So that's the whole purpose of that. And I will say that we were aware that there was additional investigation needed. We had enough information to make a remedy decision and a good decision, but there, in almost every remedy and every one I've ever worked on, there's what we call pre-design investigation. So you have enough information to know what needs to be done at the site, but you need to collect additional data to refine the details. Unfortunately, here, there was a lot more data needed.
Right. Thank you.
What kind of things will happen in the last 10%?
Good question. Well, first of all, they have to answer all of our comments satisfactorily. There are parts of the design that we have not seen yet. So the 90% design was the first time we had seen a lot of the information in this. And that's one reason it took us longer to review than we had hoped. The 10%, there will be additional information about the excavation on the lot 2A2. There will be some additional information about the excavation on the CDL. Those are the areas, the last areas that they're designing the excavations for. They did not make it into the 90% design, so they will be included. So there will be some information we have not seen before. So that's why I said there may need to be additional comments on the 100% design. Usually a 90% design, the difference between the 90 and the 100% is just fixing the errors or making modifications that the agency requires. In this case, there's a little bit of new information that will also be included in that document.
The Department of Energy is responsible party at Westlake Landfill. So how do you as the EPA regulate another federal agency? Also, how do you keep them from stalling the cleanup at this point? And then we continue with testing further and further out and get nowhere.
The DOE is one of the responsible parties. They are not actively involved in the design. They are paying, they have an agreement to pay and I'm not exactly sure, I'm going to say a third because there are three parties. But they have an agreement to pay a certain amount. They chose to not be involved in the design because they didn't want there to be that kind of conflict of interest of a government agency, influencing the design. So that was a conscious decision on their part. As far as when we're trying to get a negotiated order signed, the Department of Justice, we have a attorney from the Department of Justice, and they have an attorney for the Department of Justice. So we're not using the same attorneys. So they are separate. I mean, we talk, maybe a little more freely, but the work is being done separate. So when we comment on something, it's something that's been submitted by the three parties jointly.
So you have faith that this is going to move forward and you're not going to get
Absolutely.
backlash from them?
Absolutely, absolutely. And they have been paying their share. I know that there's been concern that they haven't been to the meetings before. They did come, I think, to the last one a year ago in May. But that is because they're not involved in the technical details. They pay their share and then have stayed out of the technical details.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
My question is related. Who are the responsible parties? And are they exclusively responsible for the cost of remediation?
I think I would say yes, as far as exclusively responsible for the cost of the remediation. Is that, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that.
So they, are they covering the full cost?
Yes, we send them bills for our time, the work that's done, and they reimburse us. It's the Department of Energy, Cotter Corporation, which is the company that purchased the material and sent it to the landfill. And then Bridgeton Landfill, which is the property owner that received the waste.
Hi, my name is Rodney. I'm at the school out in Malden Springs. I work across the street from it. 31 years. Sick from it. How safe is it going to be when you remove it? You
During
close
the
business.
removal, during the
business is going
process.
to be closed, or are you just going to be business as usual?
The excavation will be done in the open air, but there will be, there is a requirement for no visible dust. There will be, we have currently 13 air monitoring stations along the fence line. There will be additional air monitoring done where the excavation is occurring. And the material that is being excavated, the roads, all of that will be kept damp to keep the dust down. Anything I'm skipping?
I think Chris did a good job of summarizing it, but I just wanted to mention the 90% design has pages of requirements for exactly these things. And that is a big part of what we are reviewing very closely. And there will definitely be more, there will be a meeting at some point in the future where we will talk about air monitoring and, seek your all's feedback. But just know there's a lot of attention being paid to how to get this out of the ground without spreading more contamination or harming the workers. So.
Yeah, and part of the air monitoring will be finalized by the remedial action contractor. So not all of the information will be in the current design because the contractor actually doing the work has the responsibility to protect their workers. So they will be proposing what monitoring and requirements are put in place when the actual excavation occurs. And we'll review that before it happens, but it won't be submitted until the remedial action plans are submitted.
Hello, one more question. Considering the initial contaminants into the landfill, the purpose was to leach out uranium and radium and thorium from existing materials, and considering that 58.2% of the REM feed, or the level of 58.2 would still be quite high, but below your threshold for removal, is there any threat that that fill dirt or rock that still may meet the threshold to stay in place would become fodder for leaching out other kinds of radium, uranium, or thorium into those deep holes that you talked about with that backfill? And how do you prevent that going forward besides, monitoring the 500 feet?
Well, the main way we prevent leaching is that we put the engineered cover over anywhere that there is rim left on site. And the engineered cover that we are requiring is actually the type of cover that meets the criteria for a hazardous waste landfill. So a standard landfill, we look at this as permeability, which is the ability for water to move through a material. So the standard requirement for a sanitary landfill is something called 10 times or 1 times 10 to the minus 5 centimeters per second. What we have required is 2 orders of magnitude higher than that, or lower. Actually, it's less permeability, but it's a 10 time or a 1 times 10 to the minus 7 permeability. So we have, which essentially means water should not be getting into the landfill to leach out. So that's the plan. The other thing is that we're targeting the higher concentration material, which is much more likely to leach. And there will be continued monitoring. We do have requirements for monitoring wells, and we are currently monitoring those to kind of establish a baseline. What are the concentrations now? And they're doing statistical analysis of that. And that we required that to be done during the design work so that when they actually start excavating and put the cap on, we can compare. When they were excavating, did more material go into the water? Or when we put the cover on, do we see concentrations gradually decreasing? Those are the things we look at. But to see those kinds of trends takes years a lot of times. But we are planning ahead by requiring a baseline to be established up front so that we can do those evaluations in the future. I think Dawn had a...
Hi, my name is Dawn Chapman. I think my question is more directed towards Bob Juergens. I don't trust the DOE. We've been given zero reason to trust them. And I'm glad to hear that y'all seem kind of optimistic that they're going to sign that enforceable order. I don't think any of us are. And it might be, if they actually did, that would be like the first time they ever did anything proactive or anything to show. I think, so my question for you is, because hearing the whole, well, we got a DOJ or, lawyer and they got a DOJ lawyer, that's also not very comforting. What's the support like from the top administration of EPA for the cleanup of this site?
There is very high support to get this completed. DOE has been, we can't go too much into the negotiations for the agreements for the final, who's going to pay for what, but they're at the table, they're speaking. So all 3 parties are there. That's probably all the deeper I can go. So the good news, they are there. They're talking, they're going through, who's going to be responsible for what portion. And as far as, do we have support? We have the highest support from the region. We have the highest support from headquarters to make this cleanup happen.
Because I think one thing that might help with that support, if you want to bump that a bit higher, is for like Mike Regan and people to start talking about this site and any Superfund site a little bit more, because, there's the whole lawyery thing that you're talking about, but there's also a very high platform that a presidential appointee, head of EPA, has that he can use right now to another presidential appointee, which is the head of the Department of Energy. And I think we probably would like to see that. I think we're all a little anxious.
Sure.
And, while we understand that you can't give us a date, and I agree with Tom, and I will say, don't yell at Tom, because we have asked, we have said, please don't give false dates that you can't meet. Please don't give false hope. You know, we've had that before and that's really difficult to deal with. So we appreciate that. But also we're leaving here to the mayor's point, Mayor Hines' point and Councilman Grimmer's point. We're leaving here without answers to when this amazing freaking cleanup is going to happen. So it's kind of you know, we're a little anxious here to see what happens there.
Right. And I appreciate that 100%. I will say this, we have to come up with what do we expect for our presidential transition topics? What are our high topics?
Yep.
Westlake is part of our topics.
I
So
appreciate that.
it is there.
That's
and
great to
something that
hear.
we will be discussing.
My other question about that enforceable order, you know, that's where it falls for everything to happen after it.
Yes.
Can it happen now?
We
Can they
are-
come to an agreement now before then and sign it?
Yes, and that's actually been active. What I can share is that 2 weeks ago, I think they were in Denver, sitting that down at the table, working on this. We're not in the end yet. Okay, so there's still work to be able to be done. This 90% design was critical to get to that. So everybody knows exactly what we're looking at, kind of what those costs are going to look like. So we are pushing very hard,
Okay.
our legal staff as well as DOJ.
That's great. The other comment is, you know, we've been through so many presidents now, so many different administrations. You're stable. You are not appointed. We would really like to see more of you personally out in this community for these because it's easier for us to interact. And I think everybody agrees with Bob, right? Versus in this team versus a figurehead, right? Who isn't. This is more comforting and easier for us. The other thing is I would like another round of applause for our engineers. That's a damn fine cleanup plan. If you would have told me 6 years ago that this is what I don't know that I would have believed what I see back there.
Right. And yes, I'm committed to staying involved. So I may not be at some of the meetings that have gone on. I come to more of the public meetings, but we meet a lot.
Okay.
And so this team, they don't give me an update just before this meeting. We get
Every other week.
Every other week, bi-weekly, I'm getting an update on where we're at. We're going through the timelines. We're going through what the status is. Do they need more staff to help? So if we need somebody to help, you know, I work on how we can do that. We've got a top team and so.
Signs our overtime requests.
Yes, they do put in a lot of overtime. So, so we have been working on that. So I am not distant and only
Okay.
coming to these involved the whole time.
The last thing, and then I'll hand it over, is I think moving forward, like you just gave us some really good transparent information, what you could give on any negotiations, that there is at least talks happening.
Right.
That's huge to us.
Okay.
You know, that gives us a little bit of hope because I feel like we're entering that lawyery area that we won't have visibility in. And I think that's kind of a scary, we just don't want it to go dead here, right? We don't
Sure.
want it to go radio silent with y'all.
Understood, and I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
I would also say that this meeting was also a step that needed to happen for that mediation to move forward because the ESD has some requirements that have to be done in the remedy. So the PRPs wanted to understand all of those details before they're wanting to sign an order. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to move forward with this. We could have moved forward with this without coming to you guys. We felt like we had told you we were going to update you with changes, with information. So we felt like it was important to have this meeting so that we can move forward, finalize that ESD, and our attorneys can use that to help push the negotiations forward.
What's the difference here? And actually, it sounds good what you're saying. You're good about this. But nonetheless, I actually have a question about the shape of water. So we've got an inquiry will cover, and we're got OU3. My concern is with this place, it at times has produced more leachate than anybody else, and I'm pretty certain they planted themselves on top of an underground spring. But you know more about that from OU3 now than what's really happening down there. But my question ultimately is, if we screw up, if we put this cover on and the stuff is still hitting the ground
Well, there will be a,
We're not at that stage yet.
there will be a, there would be a separate OU3 remedy that will lay out the requirements for that operable unit. But if the cover is not functioning as appropriate, we can look at the 5-year reviews and the data and say, you know, we need to improve, we need to figure out what's going on. So, you know, there may be minor repairs or, you know, something like that that would be evaluated. I can't say exactly, but I'm sorry.
You got a couple backup as a community, you got a couple backup protections, correct, for the stuff that we're leaving in the ground. Just, I'm one
Right.
of those guys that was, I
Right.
want it all out.
Understood.
And, you know, I understand reality, I understand what we're looking at, but under the odds that somehow we don't encapsulate it, and we find out in OE3 that we didn't encapsulate it, we're gonna go back and fix it.
Right.
Okay, that's the answer I was looking for.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say that the leachate that the landfill is creating, it's the Bridgeton landfill because of the SSE that has created huge volumes of leachate. That leachate production is hugely decreased, so much so that the way they were treating the leachate was no longer working because it was too low a concentration. So they've had to modify how they actually operate the leachate treatment, pre-treatment plant. And that landfill is, it's in the old quarry, so it's dug down into the rock and the rock has water in it. So yes, there is some water that seeps into that. And so there will be continuing leachate removal. My understanding, you may, you know, talk to the state about that because they oversee that part. But my understanding is that leachate removal will continue.
Does the technology exist or the science exist for this cover that you need? Because last time that was kind of like, we didn't know. We were kind of a unique situation with what you had to contain.
It is not a totally unique situation. There are a couple of other sites similar, but each cover is designed for the specific site. So yes, we've done lots of like radon modeling. The PRPs have done radon modeling to make sure that what comes out of the landfill is not going to exceed allowable levels. So I think there are several different ways that the design could be done. I think in general, we have a good design. We do have a few comments that need to be addressed, but.
I was just gonna say, when we were here last year, we did not have the 90% design. So the last time we had information about the cover was from the PRPs was 2021-ish. But when we get these comments out on the 90% design, there will be a ton of information about how this cover, what the different layers are, how it's going to function. There is some redundancy, like you were asking, Doug. So there's different ways for if something fails, a backup to be in place. There's a whole operation and maintenance plan. Even though Chris was talking, yeah, under the circle law, we have 5-year reviews, but these plans specify things that have to happen much more regularly than that between those time periods to make sure that things are going the way they're supposed to.
I've got a couple questions. The underground fire. I've noticed on your new maps, you've got room that's encroaching onto that area. How close are you?
It's the same distance it's been. There's no rim that's closer to the SSE. It's not any closer than it was previously. We did find more rim, but it hasn't gotten any closer to the SSE. The SSE is, you know, by all indications, is decreasing in size. Basically, you know, what happens with those is they consume all of the fuel and then, you know, they go away. So all indications are, you know, they have consumed a huge amount of fuel, as you all bared witness to, unfortunately, the horrendous experience that you guys had to live through. And I think it's significantly improved now. We're still monitoring it, but it is not out yet.
One other question. I know you're going in 5 years. Have you taken into account that?
We have, I mean, yeah, that's been brought up a couple of times. there's really not a whole lot that can be done for, New Madrid type earthquake, the size that happened previously. Yeah, and, if an earthquake happens, we go out and assess whether there's been damage to the landfill and we repair it. That's,
The 90% design, certain aspects of the cover and stability look at earthquake activity. So that's in there as well.
So looking towards the future, will EPA be the ones in charge of long-term monitoring, or will that be transferred over to DOE legacy management like some of the other sites in St. Louis?
no, it will stay in with EPA as far as I'm aware. They, the FUSRAP is a special program that, and this is an NPL circle site, so it will stay with EPA. I think there's, okay, there.
Certainly, I don't have the patience. Everybody else seems to have. I was just here 6 years ago. But I did want to thank Chris and all the other people for sharing what they know. I had a couple of questions that maybe your own mind, maybe, but Chris and I were talking about like the added risk. From 1 in 10,000 to 1 million cancer, risks with the rim and 53 picotures.
50, yeah, 52.9, yep.
So that's about 10 times background. Right? Didn't background about 5?
Background's about 3.
Oh, 3, okay. So I guess I just want to get clarification on that.
So the way we look at risk, you're right that it is higher than the background. But when we take into consideration that we're removing the shallow material, at least, and the bulk of the high concentration material, and putting the cover over it. So with risk, you have to have, both, there has to be a risk and a way for that risk to impact people. So what we're doing by putting the cover on and doing the design work we're doing is trying to make it so that there is no exposure. The risk, there is still risk with the radioactive material, but it's very unlikely that anyone would ever come into contact with it based on the design that we're implementing.
Thank you for that clarification. So that's like encapsulating, for lack of a better word, the activity of the radioactivity.
Yeah,
So
and Tom can speak to the risk, I think.
My next question is in relation to dose. So that's a total to dose. And so that's a totally different, it's all related, but do the workers, or is there any data to show the public that the workers have been wearing dosimeters, and there's a range that from, this is my second time in 6 years, they've been working there.
Yeah.
Is there a range of rounds or milligrams?
Yeah.
What kind of situation does that present itself?
Yeah, I mean, every worker out there wears a dosimeter, including us when we go out there. We have never had really a detectable level when we've gone out. We're not out there as frequently, but I don't think there has ever been any exposure from those.
So all of the remediation workers, all the investigations, all the drilling, they are all in dosimetry programs. We are in dosimetry programs. Every time we go to the site, we have to wear dosimeters. Most of the contamination at Westlake is thorium-230. Thorium-230 does not emit hardly any gamma. So that dose is usually something we worry about. It's not the only thing, but it's usually something we worry about when we have a lot of gamma. There is radium-226 at this site. That is a gamma emitter. And at this point, we have a pretty good understanding of where the parts of the site are that have enough gamma activity that we can even detect. But with this rock cover that we have, we didn't talk about this tonight, but in 2015, 2016, we had the PRPs put 12 inches of gravel and a geotextile fabric on top of any of the rad material that was near the surface. Even that 1 foot of additional distance and some shielding from that rock cuts down the gamma so much that it's hard to detect at this point. So at this point, we really don't have a dose risk to workers. There's a lot of air monitoring that still happens though, because like I said, that thorium-230 doesn't emit gamma, but it does emit alpha radiation. And so that's something we don't want to breathe, we don't want to ingest. So there's a lot of monitoring both for workers and when we're out there overseeing to make sure that, you know, we aren't breathing or inhaling any of that stuff. And then we have the 13 air monitoring stations around the edge of the site. Did that?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah,
Sure.
that does. So is there a way that I can go online to see the ranges of the legal areas and also the ranges of what you want to do?
I know right now, this moment, that I can send you a link to the air monitoring data for the last, we're getting close to 10 years. So yeah, the picocuries per liter on that, yes. Dosimetry, I'm not sure, yes. But there may be other gamma information that's not a worker dose, is that there's some privacy things there, but there's probably other gamma information that I could get to you.
When you say it's never exceeded, isn't the workers involved in radiation, the EPA or maybe it's the DOE, I'm not sure. But those limits are quite a bit higher.
They are, yes.
So you said you was referencing, oh, they've never been.
I think what,
The higher limits that it's never exceeded, or
fair question, yeah, fair question. So I don't know if everyone got that. He asked about worker doses or worker doses that are protected for workers are a lot higher than the doses for the general public. And the question was, were we saying that the higher worker doses have not ever been exceeded versus like a general public? And I don't have, I don't get the dosimetry records for the remediation workers. So I can't, I haven't seen the data to be able to tell you for sure. But yeah, but they're between an employer and an employee. Those
Related.
yeah, so someone, the person who had that dose record, it would have to be up to them if they would share that. But what I'm getting at is, I think I have a lot of other dose and gamma information that isn't specific to worker protection that can help answer the same question. And to be more specific, we're really talking at the Westlake landfill site about doses that would be protected of the general public. We simply do not have enough radium and gamma emitting radionuclides for the type of work that's happening to even get like anywhere close to a worker protection limit.
Thank you so much.
Hey, I had a question regarding communication on that. You know, last year we were told, well, I think last year that we would be getting newsletters out probably every quarter. And I haven't seen one in probably close to a year. Is that something, and that's one of the ways that the general public was receiving information. So I think there's a lack of information to the general public because it's not being put out. Now I know Jessica, we can contact anytime we want to here, but particularly with the 90% coming out, there's going to be a lot of information from what I understand that's there. And is there something like a newsletter that's going to be coming out that would have that information in it? And how will that be disseminated? You know, you've got some of the email addresses of some people, but not everybody. So how is all of that going to be disseminated in the future? And I know, you know, I've get questions regularly, and I'm sure particularly our politicians, Randy and others, get a lot of information, questions about what is going on,
Right.
and we just haven't been getting that information.
And I apologize, you're absolutely right. We have not gotten Westlake updates out recently. We actually have been working on one. But you're right, we need to do a better job of getting those Westlake updates out, and we will. So I appreciate that comment, and you're absolutely right. As far as how we will disseminate the information, we have about 250 email addresses that people have provided to us. We also put it on our site profile page and the dashboard. When we have more information about like an approved design, we can come back and talk about that and have meetings to actually, go through documents. I mean, we can, have working meetings and things like that if people want. It's kind of, some people are like technical details. We just want to know when it's starting. Other people want to dig into the dose levels that the workers are getting. So it's a real, it's hard to please everyone, but what we need to do is make information available so that people can get what they want. So do you have any other ideas? I think, yeah, so we have, the dashboard that shows the borings, the groundwater data. So that has some information. The site profile page has all of the approved documents and comments and a lot of the draft documents with the comment letters. And so you can see how they change to when they're final.
A lot of people don't even know there is such a thing as a dashboard.
Right, and we have.
How to get that information out to how they can get.
There was, well, and I know that there was we sent out a mailing to.
So we did do a physical mailing, I believe it was before the May 9th, 2023 meeting. We sent it out, I think it was about a mile and a half radius from the site, and that included about 1,500 or so addresses that we sent it out, both residential and commercial. And that was, I believe it was a Westlake update that went out to those. So if requested. Yeah, we did request people, if they wanted to be added to the email list to get in contact with me. And, if they wanted to get added to, or if they didn't want to receive any information specific to businesses, to let us know. So if you know of anybody who would like to get added to our email distribution list, they can let me know. We also have a sign up link on our site profile page.
We tried to, we put out a couple of articles in local newsletters. Like I think we were able to put an article in the Bridgeton newsletter. I think that's actually something we should follow up on and see if we can get some information out that way. I know that there's also a lot of media coverage. I mean, I've seen a lot of, articles and TV stations and radio stations that do things. So, I mean, we're trying to get the information out. But if you have suggestions for better ways to do that, we're happy to hear that.
And just one other thing quickly. So we've also been trying different ways, different formats to get information out. We recorded Tom and Chris recorded 2 in the moment videos that were posted to social media. And we did send out some email updates. They were pretty brief for upcoming field work. But I completely agree with you that we need to do maybe a more substantial update and keep those regularly, those regular forms and means of communication with the public a little bit more frequent. So that's something that we can definitely work on.
There wasn't a physical mailer that went out for this particular meeting, right?
Not for this meeting, no.
Can you give us just. Hi. Can you just give us a brief status update on OE3?
Want to do that?
So the PRPs are working diligently. So their main focus over the last couple of years has been stepping out on the groundwater monitoring wells. And you've seen the maps. They've made quite a bit of progress. The biggest obstacle we're coming across is property access. We're running out of places to put wells. So we've gone to looking at city right-of-ways to step out. And again, they're looking at the 1,4-dioxane as sort of the marker to where to delineate. So that process is ongoing. And they're doing the quarterly sampling as required. So the step-out process is not done yet, but they're working on it. And they're looking to expand and fill in some of the blank spots on that. Currently, we are reviewing the 2023 annual report, and we'll be providing comments back to the PRP so they can revise it, and then we can finalize that. They've put wells, the most recent cluster of wells is MW 519, which is at the river over by the paintball park, sort of south of there. And they've also put out another well, set of wells just north of 370 highway east of the river. So actually they're finishing up that cluster 519 this week, and then they will sample it. And then since it's a data-driven approach, they will look at the data and see what the next appropriate step for that would be.
And I actually have SNA's comments on that report that are in my hand. I need to review them. So once we get those reviewed, that report and those comments will be made public. So we're hoping to get those out soon. And I think, oh, go ahead.
When you started working on the plan, did you set any goals to
which
completion goals of the plan? When you started working on it, did you set a timeline?
Yes, and for OU1 or OU, we've set them for both, and we have exceeded both of the timelines that we set for ourselves. Yes.
Okay. Can you commit to us tonight that the plan will be 100% complete within a year or less?
I can't commit. I think we will have a remedial design within a year and less than that, but I can't commit and guarantee it. But I do believe that, I mean, we're at the 90% like we talked about. There's a couple of months for them to get a revised document to us, a couple of months for us to review that, and a couple of months for them to revise that. So like I said, I can't guarantee it, but I do think based on current projections, we should have a remedial design done within the next year. That's my best, effort. Any other questions? I appreciate you guys listening. I know there was a lot of technical information, so thank you for being patient. Thank you for your feedback. If you have recommendations, please contact Jessica. She can always contact the rest of us. I encourage you to, talk to Jess. She gets lonely sitting in City Hall on her at her hours. So we really do want to provide information, and we're happy to do so. But sometimes we get very busy doing the work, and engineers, we get our heads in the documents and sometimes forget to look up. So it does help to be reminded sometimes that, hey, there are people that want to know what you're actually doing. So thank you all. And we're going to be back there. Feel free to come up and talk to us one-on-one, and we can provide additional information.
Chris, one last question that we have.
Oh, okay.
Jeffrey Lewis asked, does the 90% plan include any emergency response in the event of a nuclear?
Yeah, I think we could, I could say there is no fissionable material in the landfill. So as far as a nuclear event like an explosion, that's not possible because there is no material that can, that is fissionable and that can explode. As far as a nuclear event, I mean, like erosion or something like that, I don't think there is a specific plan, but if you want to speak more to that.
I was just gonna say emergency planning and planning for spills or planning for releases is a major part of the design. There will be a lot more of that when the remedial action starts and that contractor's in place and has to put, plans in place. But we have something called a site management plan. We're actually using it right now. It has an emergency response plan for our design. And we actually meet quarterly with first responders, the firefighters, the folks at the landfill, the contractors for the PRPs doing the design, and kind of talk about what's going on and if we need to make any updates. But the point is, we have that now. The 90% design has information for that, for the RA in the future, and then there will be even more when we get to RA.